Story number 1.
The silent passenger. I've always loved driving at night. There's something soothing about the empty roads, the hum of the engine, and the way the headlights carve a path through the darkness. I took a lot of late-night drives when I couldn't sleep, especially after my mom passed away. That's how I ended up on Old Mill Road at 2 a.m., a long, lonely stretch of highway cutting through the woods. I'd driven it dozens of times before, but something felt different that night. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that made you roll your windows up instinctively. I first noticed her just after the old bridge. A woman, standing on the shoulder of the road, her head bowed, dark hair falling over her face. She was wearing a pale dress that almost seemed to glow in the moonlight. I slowed down. She didn't look up. Something about her posture made my chest tighten. She wasn't waving for help, wasn't moving at all, just standing there like a mannequin dropped in the middle of nowhere. My instincts screamed at me to keep driving, but guilt tugged at me. What if she really needed help? I stopped the car a few feet ahead and rolled down the passenger window. "Are you okay?" I called out. She didn't answer. Slowly, she turned her head, just enough for me to see her face, or the absence of it. Her features were blurry, like an overexposed photo. Her eyes two black smudges that didn't reflect the light. My breath caught in my throat. Without thinking, I hit the gas, speeding down the road and glancing nervously in my rearview mirror. She was gone. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that my tired mind was playing tricks on me. But then I smelled it. Rotten. Wet. Like something had crawled out of a swamp and into my car. The hairs on my neck stood up. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, and this time I saw her. She was sitting in the back seat, her head tilted, staring at me with those hollow, smudged eyes. I swerved, nearly running off the road, and when I looked again, she was gone. But the smell remained, clinging to the air like a warning. I drove home as fast as I could, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I didn't turn off the engine. I couldn't bring myself to sit in silence. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Kyle. He answered groggily, annoyed, but his irritation faded when he heard my voice shaking. "You saw her," he said quietly. "What are you talking about?" "The woman on Old Mill Road," he said. "It happened to my cousin, same thing. She's attached to that stretch of highway." "Attached how?" "No one knows. Some say she was hit by a car years ago, but her body was never found. Others think she's looking for something or someone, but if she gets in your car, it's not random." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "It means you need to be careful. She doesn't leave until she gets what she wants." I didn't sleep that night. The smell lingered in my car for days, no matter how much I cleaned. I stopped driving at night, stopped taking Old Mill Road altogether. But she wasn't done with me. A week later, I woke up to find muddy footprints trailing from my front door to my bedroom. They stopped at the foot of my bed. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, but no one was there. The next night, I heard her whispering. Just faint enough that I couldn't make out the words, but her voice was unmistakable. It came from the corner of my room where the shadows seemed darker than they should have been. Every night since, she's come closer. I see her reflection in windows, her shadow flickering in my peripheral vision. I know she's waiting for something, but I don't know what, and I'm terrified of the moment I find out.
Story number 2.
The Forgotten Forest. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, the forest was a second home to me. Endless trails, towering pines, and streams clear enough to see every stone on the bottom. I spent more time there than in my own backyard. But there was one part of the forest no one went to, the Northern Grove. The older kids called it the Forgotten Forest. They said compasses stopped working there, and strange noises echoed through the trees. Every story was the same. If you went in, you didn't come back out the same. Most of it was just small-town superstition, but it was enough to keep me away. Until the day I had no choice. It started with my dog, Max. He was a goofy golden retriever with more energy than sense. One afternoon, while I was hiking one of our usual trails, Max darted off into the woods, barking like he'd found something. "Max! Come back!" But he didn't. His barking faded deeper into the forest, and I had no choice but to follow. The trees thickened as I ran, the undergrowth grabbing at my legs. I wasn't worried at first. Max had wandered off before. But then I realized something. I was heading north. The air grew colder, and the trees taller and denser. My phone had no signal, and the sunlight barely broke through the canopy. I called for Max again, my voice cracking, but there was no answer. Just silence. Then, in the distance, I saw movement. It wasn't Max. It was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But Max barked again, somewhere deeper in the grove. I pushed forward, keeping my eyes on the figure. But when I reached the spot where it had been, it was gone. The grove was wrong. The air felt heavy, and the trees seemed to twist and loom as if they were alive. The ground beneath me was soft, almost spongy, and the smell of earth was overpowering. I finally found Max in a clearing, sitting perfectly still. His tail didn't wag, and his ears were flat against his head. "Max!" I rushed to him, but he didn't react. It was as if he didn't recognize me. Then I heard it. A voice, faint and melodic, coming from the trees. It wasn't speaking English, if it was even speaking a language at all. The sound was hypnotic, pulling me toward the edge of the clearing. I turned to look, and there they were. Figures, dozens of them, standing just beyond the trees. They were tall and thin, their skin pale as bone. Their faces were featureless except for deep, hollow eyes that seemed to drink in the light. One of them stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its hand, long and clawed, reached out toward me, beckoning. Max growled, breaking the trance. I snapped back to myself and grabbed his collar, yanking him toward the path. The figures didn't follow, but their eyes never left me. By the time we made it back to the main trail, the sun was setting, and the air felt normal again. Max seemed fine, wagging his tail as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't fine. That night, I dreamed of the figures. I saw their hollow eyes and heard their strange, melodic voices. When I woke up, there was dirt on my shoes and pine needles in my bed. The next day, I told one of the older townsfolk about what I'd seen. His face went pale. "You went to the grove?" he asked. I nodded. "Don't go back," he said. "It's their place. They let you leave, but they won't forget." I've stayed away from the northern grove since, but sometimes I feel their eyes on me, even in my own home. Max has started growling at the corners of the room at night, his fur bristling like something's there. And every so often, when I'm alone in the woods, I hear that voice again, faint, melodic, and calling my name.
Story number 3.
The room that wasn't there. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. Sure, I liked a good horror story as much as anyone else, but they were just stories. That's what I told myself, at least, until the summer I helped my friend Ben move into his new apartment. It was an old building, the kind of place that looked like it had seen better days 50 years ago. Peeling paint, creaky floors, and a faint smell of mildew in the hallways. Ben had lucked into the place because the previous tenant had vanished without a trace, leaving all their stuff behind. I joked about it as we carried in his boxes. "You're living in a ghost story, man. Missing tenant, creepy old building, classic setup." Ben just laughed. "Free furniture and cheap rent? I'll take the ghost." The first time something felt off was that same night. We were unpacking when Ben stopped mid-sentence, staring at the wall across from the kitchen. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "Knocking," he said. "Like tapping." I listened, but the apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge. "Probably just the pipes," I said, shrugging it off. Ben nodded, but he looked uneasy. A week later, Ben called me in the middle of the night. "I need you to come over," he said. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "What's going on?" I asked. "There's something wrong with this place." When I got to his apartment, he looked pale, like he hadn't slept in days. He pointed toward the far end of the hallway. "There's a door there," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "A door that wasn't there before." I followed him down the hallway. At the end, where the wall should have been, there was a narrow wooden door, its surface warped and splintered with age. I swear it hadn't been there when we moved in. "Did the landlord put this here?" I asked. Ben shook his head. I asked. "He said there's no room back here, just a load-bearing wall." We stared at the door for a long time before Ben reached out and turned the knob. It opened easily, swinging inward with a low creak. The room beyond was small and dark, with peeling wallpaper and a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was no furniture, no windows, just a square of space that felt wrong. It was colder inside, too, like stepping into a freezer. "What the hell is this?" I muttered. Ben didn't answer. He was staring at something on the floor, a faint, circular stain, reddish-brown and faded with time. After that, things got worse. Ben called me constantly, saying he heard whispers at night, faint and indistinct, coming from the new room. He started sleeping on the couch, terrified to walk past the door. One night he sent me a photo. It was the door. Only now it was slightly ajar, and a shadow seemed to be spilling out from the gap, darker than the surrounding hallway. "I didn't open it," he texted. The last time I heard from Ben, he called in a panic, his voice shaking. "I locked it," he said. "I locked the door, and it still opened." I told him to leave, to come stay at my place until we figured it out. But he wouldn't. "I can't leave," he said. "It won't let me." I didn't know what he meant, and he hung up before I could ask. The next day I went to check on him. His apartment was empty. Not just empty, completely cleared out. No furniture, no boxes, no sign that anyone had been living there at all. The landlord swore the place had been vacant for months, that no one named Ben had ever rented it. I tried to call him, but his number was disconnected. A few weeks later, I drove by the building again, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I parked outside and stared at the windows, hoping for, I don't know, a sign maybe. That's when I saw it. In the window at the end of the hallway, where Ben's apartment had been, there was a shadow, a figure standing perfectly still, watching me, and behind it, just barely visible in the dim light, was the outline of a door.